1939 to 1945, a dangerous time of new and perilous voyages for Captain Bartlett.
During the war years, he was down to the Arctic every year, helping them establish naval and air bases in particular along the coasts of Greenland and to provide for the defense of North America.
We were totally engaged in war work and doing surveys and soundings and mapping, charting in areas for Arctic bases.
The Morrissey spent the war years crossing the treacherous waters of the Arctic with her hull stuffed full of radio equipment, mapping gear, and supplies. There were jolting, perilous surprises. Once, suddenly, a U-boat came to the surface right alongside. If the Germans had looked below the Morrissey's decks, they would have blown her out of the water. But as the story goes, Captain Bob's bravado prevailed. He gave them some fresh fish and they went on their way. What a tale, and how he loved to tell it. A humble fisherman and a modest little schooner conning the Germans right off their conning tower. It was a yarn of the finest sort. A young relative who sailed with Bartlett remembers how he loved that kind of adventure and the rewards it brought.
It was presented to Captain Bob by the president of the society, who at the time was the son of Charles Darwin. And it was presented by Darwin in the Royal Albert Hall in the presence of an audience of some 10,000 people. I remember the skipper used to describe his experience. He became a bit apprehensive when he realized, there was such an auspicious occasion, such a large audience. And he had, before he went, he had a professional, right, suitable speech for him. But he sat through the introduction in such a state of agitation that the hand was moving all the time. And when he got up there to give his address, he realized that the paper had completely disintegrated. He was left alone on his own, no speech, no written speech. But he did remarkably well. He brought the entire audience of 10,000 to their feet, not clapping, but cheering. And so went the Albert Hall acceptance of the Royal Geographic Society.
Many awards, many medals, some from royalty, some from the academies, and even the most prestigious, the Hubbard, given to very few by the National Geographic Society. Bartlett was an explorer when there were big things left to explore, places to go where nobody had ever gone, but where, with bravery and luck and money, you might go yourself. He gave lectures to rich, manly audiences in dinner jackets and came back from that very dangerous wilderness unhurt, unchanged.
He was a very outgoing person. He never forgot his friends. And he could mix with all levels of society. I don't think it affected him one bit. He used it probably sometimes, but I don't think it, we would say it didn't go to his head, no.
He had a real flair for being a bit of a showman, and he didn't mind playing this role. So he did, I think, have sort of a flair for the dramatic, and he liked to, it seemed that he liked to be in dramatic circumstances or situations, which he was quite often.
I think fame found him. Of course, with Perry, that was just the door to fame. And I don't think he did what he did with Perry to seek fame, but it was just followed him from then on. Now every year then when he went north in the summer, he'd take movies. And he would make lectures, go on lecture tours all winter to make money for to finance the trip for the following year. So I think a lot of the movies that he took was something else that directed attention to him.
Bob Bartlett was one of the first travelers ever who could prove his tales were true. There were walruses and bears in the seas below the pole, and uncooperative specimens of the Arctic muskox. The bears did live on floating islands of ice, the walruses on other islands. The Eskimos existed. The icebergs floated. The world up there was real and clean and wonderful. Even the movie industry paid attention. In the 30s, Bob Bartlett was cast in a feature film that was not otherwise remarkable. He played a sealing captain.
I never get touched with a snowblind, and I can work like 10 greasy jacks.
All right, then. I'll take a chance. But if you die on my hands, I'll never forgive you.
He was no actor, but he was a showman and conscious of his image. For example, he said he never drank, although some claim to know otherwise. He never married, apparently never fell in love, although the reporters and the press agents and the people loved him, his magnificent stories, and his unbelievable pictures. Maybe he did have a faint romance with a Broadway belle. In a letter, he promised her a piece of an iceberg. Maybe that's all he promised. This from his diary.
I'm sorry I never married. This is my greatest loss in life. But then it's probably some poor woman's gain. I once told a writer friend I'd never wed because I loved the sea. You don't love it, he said. It's a kind of insanity you fellers get, wanting to be wet and cold and facing dangers that come with this lady of the sea.
And the dangers of the frozen land beyond. Northern explorers were completely isolated, some straying far from rescue. One Bartlett saved said nobody else could have done it.
The Crockerland expedition ran from 1913 to 1917. It had not planned to run that long, but no one could get Macmillan and his crew out of the area. And finally, after 4 years, when a ship showed up, Macmillan didn't have to even ask who was the captain of that ship. The account is that he yelled out a greeting, knowing that it was Bartlett.
Bartlett was a kind of rescue specialist, self-taught, the hard way, on a voyage of the Carluck in the seas above the northwest corner of North America.
The early 1900s, vast areas of what we now consider the Canadian Arctic really were unclaimed, and there was a lot of interest on the part of many nations to, in fact, claim these lands.
Carluck was a scientific exploration expedition put in place by the government of Canada, headed by William Stephenson, who was a well-known Arctic explorer. And he was to go into the western Arctic with a group of scientists to carry out some scientific exploration during 1913, late fall and winter of 1914. He asked Bartlett if Bartlett would command the vessel, the Carluck.
The idea was to explore these lands, land scientists in the region, and to lay claim to the region for Canada through the scientific activities that were being done.
The Carluck was to enter the high Arctic through the Bering Strait in September. Bartlett warned the ice was treacherous, and before long, Carluck was trapped. Stephenson left the ship to hunt, and that was the last Stephenson saw of her. The Carluck drifted back past Point Barrow, reversing her way through increasingly threatening ice towards the Chukchi Sea and Siberia. The ice crumpled into massive, menacing pressure ridges. The Carluck was captured, held fast. She was a fishing boat, after all, only reinforced for ice navigation. Finally, she drifted to a point some 80 miles from Wrangel Island.
Bartlett, being the capable northern explorer that he was, foresaw this real possibility, and he had the Inuits organize the building of some igloos that they could live in on the ice in case the vessel did go down.
On January 11th, 1914, at 4 p.m., the ship died.
Once he was certain that the Carluck was going to disappear, going to be crushed in the ice, he got all of the crew and all of the remaining people off the vessel and put them into the ice huts that he had built, and but himself stayed until he was certain that the Karluk was going to go down. And while he was sitting there, he played his phonograph and played music. And when he finished every one, as he finished each one, he would throw it in the stove, break it and throw it in the stove, and it supplied his, it was his heat source. So he knew he wouldn't be able to carry it. It was more important that they carry food than that he carry his phonograph and the music. So he knew they were going to end up at the bottom of the sea anyway.
As the hull folded into itself underneath him, Bartlett raised the ship's flag as a final farewell. And then, as she began to slide under the surface of the frozen sea, he stepped off her stern onto the ice.
He ultimately got them down to Wrangel Island, where they established some living accommodation with snow huts and so on for the people that were left. And then he and one of the Inuits took a dog team and some 50 days worth of supplies to walk around Wrangel Island across the ice cap to the coast of Siberia. And that was a distance of about 200 miles over some of the worst traveling conditions you could ever imagine. But he did it, and ultimately they sighted land and started then east toward the Bering Straits with a view to getting to Alaska and getting help for the people on Wrangel Island.
The journey back took every atom of his strength and every skill he'd learned in the Arctic. It was a completely unparalleled achievement, one of the great legends of survival in the North. An improvised expedition over broken sea ice some 700 miles. An unbelievably heroic feat with so many lives saved. Another amazing adventure.
There he was, a rough Arctic explorer, used to the gales of the north. Thick, thick wrists, nurtured by the halyards of the schooner Morrissey and the Roosevelt and the Cardiff. The high-pitched voice, screaming at the winds, defying the gales. And here, this hard-bitten sailor had two great passions in life, really. The primary one was the love of poetry. Here, the book that I've been referring to indicates his love of gentler things of life. There's one there now. This, I think, really, I am the captain of my soul. How appropriate that should have been. I hadn't seen that before, but I can understand why he cut that particular one out and put it in amongst his treasures. Every schoolboy knows it. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. And yet, the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
April 28, 1946, he died. Not from any Arctic peril, but from pneumonia. The New York Times praised him. The NBC radio network honored him with 1 minute of silence. Hundreds came to pay their last respects as he was buried in Brigus, latitude 4735, longitude 5320. A few months later, his schooner, the beautiful Morrissey, mysteriously caught fire and sank into the dark, murky waters of New York Harbor. It seemed a legend had ended.
I think a lot of other individuals could get ships up to the Arctic, but the Arctic ocean floor is littered with the remains of many ships. Bartlett was able to get his ships and his men up to the Arctic and back. I think save for the Karluk. certainly in the later part of his career, he never lost a man on any of his expeditions.
There's not many people who could accomplish the things he did. I think a lot of it was planning, of course, and knowing what to do and when to do it.
They were certainly men of their time, and they were certainly larger than life.
I'd say he was probably the best ice navigator alive in his day.
Challenging the North and challenging finding and cutting the trail to the North Pole in that circumstance, equally so challenging finding Wrangel Island and the coast of Siberia and getting back in those circumstances. You had to be, those were efforts of heroic proportion. So I would say, yes, Bartlett was a hero.
And in fact, not entirely a forgotten one, even outside Newfoundland. The scholars still read his writings, and the scientists still study the treasures he brought back. And even his beautiful ship still lives. For when the tide went out, they raised the burnt-out Morrissey from the bottom of New York Harbor and cleaned her up and repaired her. And here she is. She sails out of New Bedford, Massachusetts now, a school that moves with the wind, where young people can learn about the sea and about the world. The Bartlett family no longer goes to sea, but the Bartlett Tunnel still cuts through the rock off Conception Bay. Youngsters have painted their names on the face of the stone, but inside, away from the sunlight, you can still almost see with the eyes of the young boy, walking out to look at the ocean and the ice beyond. The hallway off the well-manicured Victorian parlor of Hawthorne Cottage still leads you out towards the sea. There's talk in Brigus that the fish are coming back, but the Newfoundland of Captain Bartlett is gone and won't return. There are only traces of it in the town now, especially in the careful look of the cottage. It's a place from the past that still looks like a safe harbor after a long voyage to an unmapped land and back again.
Well, we're safely home again and made fast to the dock. I hope you had a good time as we had. Goodbye, and don't forget to visit the Arctic next summer. It will at least keep you cool.